a lot of the coastline, particularly around Australia, you see these beautiful sandy beaches. But the mud and what some people might see as the least desirable areas are super important for biodiversity. They support a whole host of different organisms. Particularly in Western Port, this whole embayment is what we call a Ramsar site, so that's a wetland of international importance, particularly for migratory birds. This is a really important space to stop off on their big journeys, but also a space to live and breed and feed.
Our coastal vegetated ecosystems, they're really made up of three quite distinct different plant groups. They're all flowering plants, so they've all descended from plants on the land that are returned to the water. Most people know a mangrove, they're a tree. And down here we just have the one species of mangrove called the white mangrove, which is Avicennia marina. That typically forms kind of fringing stands of mangrove trees where you have muddy sediment and pretty sheltered environments. And then as you get to the dry land where the water, the tide doesn't come up that frequently, you start to transition into what's called saltmarsh. And so saltmarsh is made up of a range of different plants, and their distribution is really controlled by how much they're exposed to the tide, so how long they're wet for, I guess, as well as how saline and how salty the conditions get, which is related to that. So you tend to get like these succulent species, things like glassworts, that are down where it's wetter for longer. And then you have species that are more like grasses that'll be up in the higher, really high intertidal but still salty, and then salt bushes and species like that. You have seagrasses and seagrass meadows, and we have quite a number of different species of them depending on, you know, the sediment, the shelter, the level of currents and tides and things like that in the environment.
In an intertidal system, seagrasses really serve as a really connective corridor for fauna to move, to provide breeding grounds, provide foraging grounds, feeding grounds. So seagrass meadows sort of serve as this like protective nursery space where you get like juvenile fish, you get invertebrates laying their eggs on leaves. With things like rays, they'll come along and they'll try and forage and find crustaceans in there to feed on. A huge number of fisheries species are found within seagrass meadows.
Now what the biggest challenge they're facing is related to climate-driven impacts, so in particular sea level rise. And what we're finding is a process known as coastal squeeze. So you basically have sea level rising, so tides are pushing in further. But what you would see with seagrasses is they start having to move into more shallow environments so they can get that light, and that is kind of repeated up through these different ecosystem types. So mangroves have a certain amount of inundation and sediment type that they like to be in, and as sea level rises, their distribution will shift to match that. And then saltmarsh naturally would also do that, would move up the coast and move to the right tidal levels. But what we find now is because we've built around so much of the coast, they really get squashed up against things. So first of all, you'll lose saltmarsh if sea level rises too much because it can't migrate naturally up towards high ground where its optimal habitat is. You get things like mangroves encroaching on saltmarsh and that'll outcompete them, and so that's a really major threat that's difficult to manage to saltmarsh. And likewise with saltmarsh, if the tide gets high enough, if sea levels come up and they've got nowhere to go, if they're abutting sea walls or unsuitable habitat, then they'll also disappear. If we lose these coastal ecosystems, it's going to have really significant impacts on us and on the coastal and marine environments in general. So one of the biggest benefits that these ecosystems provide is that protection of the coast. And in particular, when you have big storms and big storm surges, these vegetated communities absorb so much of that energy, which prevents it from running up the coast. And we're going to lose all of that protection, so it'll put a pretty significant risk on lots of property and beaches and shorelines where they're naturally occurring. The other thing we'll lose is really critical habitat for so many things. Just as an example, something like a King George whiting, which uses seagrasses as important nursery areas. If we were to lose that, we're losing nursery areas for species that we really value for lots of reasons.
Climate change is bringing a shift in temperature, and with that comes also a shift in sea level. What are seagrass? They're a temperate species, and so if air temperature and sea surface temperature are increasing and moving more towards those subtropical temperatures, our seagrass here in Western Port is going to struggle to acclimatise to that and adapt. We focus on seagrass restoration within Western Port, so working with our intertidal species that we get here, which you can find as the tide's going out on the mudflats. And we trial what methods are best for restoration. We look at where is the best place within Western Port to target restoration efforts. We collect the seeds, and then we have a whole side of the project where we conduct lab experiments, and we grow seagrass in nurseries, similar as you would with terrestrial species. Where you go to a plant nursery, we have those for seagrass.
So restoration, in a lot of senses, very much is like gardening the sea. So this is planting plants and figuring out how we can grow seagrass as best we can to put it back where it was.
So we're in a space now where we're moving a lot more towards restoration of these areas. So we're starting over time to develop methods that mean we can bring back some of these ecosystems like mangroves and saltmarsh and seagrasses that we know historically were once in these areas, but they were lost. Our critical role is just care, so the land care groups, the friends of groups who are involved in activities like revegetating these coastal ecosystems.
Our marine care group's main role really is to protect the sanctuary and to promote an understanding and a love of it in the community. The Jawbone Marine Sanctuary is largely unknown by people in Melbourne, but it's a perfect little marine gem at the top of Port Phillip Bay. From the deeper water where it's got rocky basalt reefs covered in algae, up through seagrass beds into tidal areas, lovely big sandbar. But the larger part of the sanctuary actually is protecting something very unusual, which is the mangroves that are so rare this far south in the world. They're quite unique. And on the inside of them are the equally precious salt marshes. We're lucky enough to have a city on the edge of the sea, but if it was built up all the way, with no natural bits, we'd be missing out on so much. This is a lovely bit of marine nature that we've got, and it's good for the soul.
Personally, it makes me feel very calm. I'm very connected to nature and my surroundings, and the country that I'm in and the land that I'm on.
Anything is possible. You're in this wild, semi-alien, semi-arid but completely flourishing environment, which just brings me a lot of joy and a lot of comfort and calm and excitement and intrigue all at the same time.